We have a quorum.
Thank you. So tonight's our first. Can you hear me? Okay. Should be. Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Tonight's our first in-person meeting of the Committee of the Whole, and later tonight, Village Board since July. Welcome back. We're live streaming the meeting and have posted the links to the live stream on the Village's social media pages. We'll be recording the meeting and it'll be available on the Village's YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting. Normally, our Committee of the Whole meetings are held downstairs in the first floor conference room, but because there's still a pandemic, we wanted to have more space for everyone, and that's why we're up here. We hope that we can have a discussion even though it's a more formal setting. Because this is our first in-person meeting in a while, here are a couple of points to make. One, masks aren't required, but we're recommending them as a way to be safe. The pandemic isn't over. If you're planning on speaking during the public comment or on one of the agenda items, please sign in on the sign-in sheet in the hallway. Second item on the agenda is public comment. We have the following public comment rules that we've been following for a long time. The public comment is for items that are not on the agenda. You can talk about agenda items when we get to those. All the comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll try to notify the speaker when your 3 minutes are up. When you come up to the podium, please say your name for the record. You may want to say your address as well. Unless you've contacted the village staff in advance, we're not going to be able to accommodate audio-visual presentations. All comments should be directed to the village board rather than to members of the audience. If a question is raised for the board, we're going to acknowledge the question, but I can't promise that we're going to answer immediately. Please make all your comments courteously. Try not to be vulgar, discriminatory, or threatening. It makes for a bad meeting. Please refrain from booing or cheering or applauding. While we were meeting remotely, we had a special procedure for public comments via email. They were read into the record. That was a pandemic-related rule because we weren't able to meet in public. We're not doing that anymore. But I assure you, if you've communicated with the village about an issue, we get them, we read them, we pay attention to them. So now, before we leave the public comment section, if anyone wants to share a comment on a non-agenda item, please speak up. All right, I don't see anyone looking to be recognized, so we're at the third item, which is discussion regarding downtown outdoor dining and temporary carry-out parking for downtown restaurants. And I would ask the Assistant Village Manager, Sharon Tanner, to present on this.
The microphone on. Sorry.
Much better now, right? Okay, great. Thank you, President Rowan, and good evening, members of the board. This evening, we have a continued conversation regarding outdoor dining and carry-out parking in the downtown. We had a robust discussion at the February 17th Committee of the Whole meeting, and this is a continuation of that conversation. When the board last discussed this in February, you had requested to get some additional feedback from members of the business community as well as members of the community at large. And so we've included in your packet copies of all comments that we received and all feedback that we received from residents Those that were sent after the board's packets were published have been sent to you and are also have hard copies at each of your places this evening. We do have representatives from some of our restaurants here this evening. The Guildhall team would like to share a few images with you, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And really this evening, after we hear feedback from the business community and some of their thoughts, the open questions that are before the board that we would ask for your discussion on this evening is whether or not you would like to allow dining structures in the street in the future, and whether you would like to allow dining structures on the sidewalks in the future. And if you do, either one of those, which kind of structures, any guidance that you would like to provide on appearance or design guidelines, and we've included some recommendations in your packet with regards to appearance and design guidelines, and then any fee that you may wish to impose. One thing that I will note, it's highlighted in your memo, but I wanted to mention it here this evening, that the staff recommendations with regards to appearance and design guidelines and fees are provided for your consideration and your discussion if you choose to allow dining structures in the future. It's not intended to presuppose a decision in that regard. And before I turn the podium over to the Guildhall team, I'd like to share a brief summary of some of the feedback that we received in our conversations with some of the restaurants in the downtown. The Guildhall, Hometown, and Valor teams had all expressed a desire to continue offering outdoor dining in structures of varying types and continuing offering carry-out parking spaces. We'll hear from the Guildhall team in a moment with regards to a different type of structure and space configuration that they may request for consideration of in the future, should you allow it. Hometown, I understand, has reduced one of their carry-out parking spaces, and Valor anticipates a request similar to that which they made in 2020 and 2021, which is for the placement of a tent for outdoor dining. Foodstuffs and Poppy Social anticipated a request to continue the carry-out parking spaces. Starbucks does not currently participate in the carry-out parking spaces, and they did not express necessarily an interest in doing so. With regards to resident feedback, it was very mixed, with about outdoor dining structures split nearly down the middle as far as the comments that we received. And carry-out parking was also mixed, though slightly more residents suggesting that the board not continue providing carry-out parking spaces, but it was not a significant margin of difference, just slightly, a slight difference. Next slide, please. Okay. And Guildhall, yeah, ready? All right. I will turn the podium over to the Guildhall team. They have some images that they would like to share with you this evening.
Thank you, Sharon, and welcome.
Perfect. I'm Jeff Shapak. This is Jennifer Litowitz. We're here on behalf of ownership of Guildhall. And Jerry as well, sitting behind us. Jerry Miller. We wanted to present to you a sort of an iteration on the existing concept that we had worked on with you long ago for spaces in the public right-of-way for use for outdoor dining. As you probably remember, when we first came in front of you with Louis Rubin from Hometown with a concept of putting greenhouses in the public right-of-way. Louis obviously has the benefit of a much wider sidewalk than we did on the corner that he's on, and we had a proposal to use a number of parking spaces directly in front of Guildhall, and collaborated closely with Louis to use the same manufacturer for those greenhouses. We had identified a company who could do it very quickly during the pandemic, and by working together with Louis, with you, we would at least have the exact same design such that it would make it easier for both the consumer, the customer here in Glencoe to know how to get in and out, but also for the village and for life safety reasons. It was the smartest and safest thing for us to do. For us, we have had great success with those greenhouses for some time now, I guess for the entire pandemic that they've been there. We did come to Phil Corrali and staff to discuss last summer when we knew it would be very warm inside of greenhouses. Could we modify them? But at that time, the board was not sure how long we would be allowed to keep them outside. And for us, it was difficult to justify the cost to redo what we had already done during the pandemic. knowing that if we didn't have enough time, it'd be very hard to amortize those costs over a short amount of time. Today's presentation is to modify what we have and to try and remove many of the greenhouse, well, all of the greenhouses, but the ones that are specifically currently on both the public right-of-way, on the platform that was built, but also on the sidewalk. So what you're seeing is still the exact same area that we have had during this entire time in the public right-of-way, including the concrete crash wall, which we always thought was a very important thing. As we've looked around the United States, certainly in the city of Chicago with their alfresco dining, around the world at images on Google, most streeteries do not have the protection that we came to the village with by building that concrete crash wall. And we feel that that was something that was very important to protect everyone with the cars in the public right-of-way and people having an outdoor dining experience. So the area we're showing you tonight is the exact same area, save for the removal of the greenhouses south of the tree that's shown, which is that square with the tree above it. Those would be removed from the sidewalk in this iteration, which would give us back the full width of the sidewalk and allow us to put all of the dining on the platform that exists today. I don't know who has the remote. Thank you. We do have a number of renderings. This one is more artistic. When we get to the colored ones, they're probably easier to read. What's important about this view is you are looking south past Guildhall's front door. You can see the concrete barricade crash wall, and this is more of an awning material. So if you picture the awning that actually extends out over Guildhall, a traditional awning material, that is what this is built out of. So it is a metal structure, temporary structure, attached to the crash wall and the platform, and it allows us to wrap it in an awning material and allow for, in the summertime, for it to be open and for wind to blow through it. And if there was rain, we'd have the ability to close it such that you could be protected from the elements. Next, please. We're now looking from the south to the north, and the reason for this image is you can see the tree, sort of in the, under the word presentation, you can see where the tree's coming up. You'll notice that all of those greenhouses would no longer be in the sidewalk public right-of-way. Everything would exist on the platform adjacent to the crash wall. Next, please. So this is possibly easier to read. Now you're looking at the facade of Guildhall, the gray in the background. That is the north alley on the north wall of Guildhall, the crash wall in the foreground. And again, that is a vinyl material wrapping a metal structure. It's columnless down the middle. So you can see a bit of a peak in the center. That's merely just so that way when the elements hit it, it can roll off of it and doesn't sit on the roof. And that is an open space throughout the entire inside of it. Next, please. And now you're looking at a section on the right-hand side, looking straight through it from the south. So you can see the tables and chairs, the column-free environment. In the upper portion, in the peak, there is metal that runs through there. That is how we'll be able to, we have electricity out there. The village helped us create an opportunity for us to be able to put an electrical panel tied back to the business outside, which is how we've been heating and bringing light to the greenhouses now, or have been doing that all along. We would replace the electric, reuse the electric and reuse the heating and lighting that we have existing inside of this structure. Can you please go back to the first slide? That was the last slide. And then looking at it in a site plan configuration, a number of tables and chairs inside. It's less seating than we currently have in the 12 greenhouse configuration, but it is enough seating that we feel that this would be a very important thing for us to have going forward. From an alfresco dining standpoint, as I'm sure you have seen in Chicago, that they've renewed theirs, New York City renewed theirs, LA, San Francisco, as well as smaller municipalities outside of major cities, both here and in Europe, are renewing the concept of outdoor alfresco dining. People have now, after 2 years of the pandemic, some still insist on it, and some are just very comfortable doing it now that they had no choice but to do it. And one of the biggest fears that I'm sure we all have here tonight is if we were to go back into a situation of another variant of COVID, that we would be in a position to not have indoor dining again, which without, and we're grateful for this board and the village and staff allowing us to have the greenhouses. Without it, I don't know if we would be here in front of you tonight. presenting another option.
Is that max out of 50-ish, just trying to do a rough count?
I think it was maybe 60 something.
Okay.
62. We can do an official count. And that was just sort of laying in 2 top, 4 top, 6 top experiences, similar to what would be inside the restaurant. The greenhouse is accommodated between as little as 2 people could, I guess 1 person could sit in it, but no more than 6 people were allowed inside the greenhouses.
Is this one big space?
It is. It's designed as one large space with a lot of fresh air coming through it because all of the sides have the ability to open up. Not open to step out onto the public right of way, but open up to let air into the space.
So one of the complaints has been the aesthetics of everything, and replacing the greenhouses with the tent structure, whatever you want to call it. Some of the complaints with across the street have been the tent.
This is not a tent.
Okay, but it's an awning, like, I mean, it's a fabric, not a metal.
Correct, it's fabric. It's awning material. It's as if you were to go look at Guild now and
Yeah.
see the awning that can retract and come out. That one's actually striped. It's
Okay.
that material.
Okay. So the question would be, without any structure, how would you feel about doing it without the cover?
Well, currently along the public right of way of the sidewalk, we have had the privilege of having tables, chairs, and umbrellas for a long time. I think that that's a great thing, assuming it doesn't actually rain. If it rains and we have wind, as we've had some crazy windstorms of recent, that wind comes sideways and an umbrella doesn't really help much. And it obviously complicates things if you can't put those people inside the restaurant because they are seating outside and the restaurant is either not open at the time or it's open but full, they have nowhere to run to. The advantage of having this is there's some protection and the sides could, a clear fabric, or sorry, a clear vinyl can come down to protect you. You see these often at a country club will have these
Yeah.
as outdoor areas because they too are trying to protect the guest.
And I can picture it. I'm just curious. I mean, so the thoughts about if we said we like doing the tables, but just getting at the aesthetics. Some people don't like what any of this stuff looks like. And so, minus building out something above people, would it still be? I mean, how beneficial do you think that would be to Guildhall and to the community?
I mean, it would be beneficial, certainly. I mean, have to have something rather than nothing.
Yeah.
Would be obviously helpful for us. I mean, this, or, some of the points that Jeff just illustrated, it makes a lot more sense for us in terms of an operation. And in the case of those situations, we did arrive quite a bit last year, actually. We had a full restaurant, although it was a small space inside the space inside. The operations turned up to that really no a lot of but yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, something that would be certainly better than nothing. This offers an opportunity if the board or the trustees is willing to look at an all-season structure. This offers a formal.
Would it be usable in the winter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're also open to design guidelines. Like we work very hard on the current design of what it is. The crash wall's painted, it's branded. We branded for our adjacent neighbor at Reach Yoga to make sure she had proper signage and worked with Phil Corrali and village staff on every little detail down to the hedge that we have growing along the edge of it. All of that, we're absolutely open to design guidelines. We actually encourage design guidelines and would love for either us to work with you on design guidelines and collaborate with you, and then we are all following guidelines. We think that would be a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Covering it would obviously make it a much more usable and a bigger benefit to those in the community who are frequenting downtown to eat and dine and eat at this restaurant. That would be a huge benefit.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking, because I mean, if we look at the complaints, the number one is parking, number two is the aesthetics, and so just trying to find a happy medium. But
I want to go back to something you said that I just want to make sure I heard this right. If you'd not put up the structures 2 years ago, you don't think you'd be here today?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we actually studied that. to be confident to be able to tell
No,
you. We studied the numbers.
I'm guessing that's the case. I was just wanted to make sure that we went over that again, just 'cause I think it's important.
It was a very typical time when we did that. We did that with, many iterations of having everything really up, down, closed, open. So that time we were heading into the decision.
I also think it's worth noting that the restaurant, while it was closed on the inside for a long time due to the order from J.B. Pritzker, Governor Pritzker, we did build a robust takeaway business, which I think the community benefits from because it's a great benefit to have that wasn't there before. The restaurant also was able to survive 2 years of it, pay all staff members, not furlough anyone, not fire anyone, and pay its rent in full on time for 2 full years. So we are also here saying thank you because that helped a lot in allowing us to do that.
Thank you for a clear, excellent presentation. We're glad you're here. We're grateful that you're here. I can't promise we're going to do everything you want, but I can promise that we're paying attention to everything you say, and we want you to succeed.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sharon, who's next?
Thank you, President Rowan. And before I move on to the remainder of the remarks that I have prepared this evening, there are representatives from the hometown team here this evening who would like to address the board, as well as Terry Jason, the Executive Director of the Winneconne Northfield Glencoe Chamber of Commerce, would also like to address the board.
We would like to hear from both of them.
Okay, I will turn the podium over to them so that they've got ample time. Lou, would you like to?
Hello. I don't love speaking in public, but I'm going to go for it. So I am Lou Rubin. My wife Julie and I are Glencoe residents since December '99. And we've owned Hometown since 2018. So thank you for letting us speak. I think I just want to address more of the philosophical philosophy of decisions that you guys are making and address my experience. First off, I believe that we all benefit when our businesses are thriving. Restaurants in particular are very impactful, and they're the heartbeat of a community pumping life into the business district. Restaurants create a gathering place for the community where relationships are formed and memories are made. We attract thousands of visitors from outside communities who discover our town and spend their dollars at other businesses, and in many cases decide to actually move here. Successful restaurants bring the foot traffic necessary to attract other businesses to town and plant their flags and bring innovative products and services. So restaurants have paved the way for the success that we're experiencing today. Our downtown is thriving, our vacancies are all-time low, demand for real estate all-time high, and the buzz and energy around town is like never before. Neighboring towns are envious of what's happening in Glencoe, and people want to be here. So I've been here for 22 years, and I can say that it has not always been the case. Half of our years here were filled with a lack of food options and significant vacancies. It wasn't until Guildhall came to town and gave us a city experience in the suburbs that things changed for restaurants in the North Shore. Guildhall anchored our downtown and cleared the path for others to follow. When COVID arrived and shut everything down, it brought an immediate awareness to everyone how special and fragile our local businesses were. COVID also forced innovation and execution of ideas like never before. Village government leaders around the country worked in partnership with businesses to bend over backwards and help clear a path to success. It was a rare opportunity where they saw things through the lens of an entrepreneur, facing uncertainty head-on with a willingness to think outside the box and try new ideas, and it worked. So now many speak of going back to normal. I believe the push to go back to normal means many municipalities will mistakenly undo the tremendous innovation they've experienced. They need to understand that it's no longer about COVID. Working in collaboration with business and government to push ideas forward is the new normal and future. I'm convinced municipalities who don't adopt this new normal will be setting themselves up to be less competitive. Fortunately, Glencoe has an advantage. The village has always been a partner to my business. Long before COVID, collaboration with our village staff and board to help improve projects that benefit our customer experience has always been the village's normal. Expanded awnings, permanent heaters, heated patios, seasonal vestibule to shield the cold weather, igloos prior to COVID, greenhouses, a mural, ice cream hut, and curbside parking are just some of the examples where the village worked with me to implement my ideas. All these projects contributed to an amazing customer experience that had a meaningful impact on our business and consequently the community. I'm extremely grateful to our village manager, Phil Corelli, for having the philosophy of getting to yes, and for guiding me through each project and getting me in front of the board when necessary. Now, as a side note, this is important, without Phil's help, Hometown would likely not exist, because in 2016, I approached him with my 16-year-old son, who I was mentoring because he was interested in placing a shaved ice cart in town. Phil took the time for us to learn the codes and introduce us to the appropriate parties, including Public Works, Zoning, and Health Department. He helped us identify an allowable location, which was a challenge at the time, and authorized us to fall under a limited special event category. This was not just a transformational experience for my son, who learned endless business lessons. I was helping one day when I saw there was a line of 55 kids out there, enthusiastically waiting for their shaved ice, and I knew I wanted that feeling in my everyday life. So this experience inspired me to open Hometown. The point being, you can't underestimate the impact that you can have by saying yes. I believe it's important to examine the issues in front of us today, curbside parking, structures, and outdoor seating, through a non-COVID lens and consider them on their own merit, and ask yourselves the following. Do these ideas benefit the community as a whole? Do they bring people to town? Do they create an experience for families, friends, and neighbors? Do they create an energy and a vibe in our town that doesn't exist elsewhere? If so, the trade-offs that come with any of these decisions are well worth it. I am in the business of pleasing people, as are you, the board. We have the same customer. One of the first lessons I learned when we opened Hometown is that everyone has a different palate. You can't please everybody. I also learned that people who are unhappy speak the loudest and often distort the true consensus. Furthermore, what we're providing, what Guildhall is providing in the context of what we're speaking, brings people from outside of the community. So there's a tremendous support from outside of our community of a lot of people that really love it. In fact, almost half our business comes from outside of the community. Let the lessons of COVID teach us how limitless our opportunities are when we work together to push ideas forward and create new experiences for our community. Let's work together to balance our push for innovation with respect for those who don't share the same vision and find a happy balance for all. We have tremendous momentum and must stay focused on continuing to build something special and great. Let's stay focused on the philosophy of getting to yes. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We hope to be able to say yes, but we obviously can't say yes to everything. But we are grateful for what Hometown has done. And I've been in Glencoe longer than you have, and I know you're right that the Uptown Business District is way different than it used to be, and we are better for it. And that's, you know, in large part because of you and folks like you. So thank you. Okay, Terry Dason?
Yes.
Terry,
I'd
come
like
on
to
up.
introduce Terry.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me speak this evening. I want to commend all of you for what you have done for this community. I am the executive director of the Winneconne Northfield Glencoe Chamber of Commerce, and I've been doing this for a long time. And Glencoe is innovative, and they are forward-thinking, and they do things that no one else does. And I commend that, you know, Phil, you're amazing in so many ways, to listening to the businesses. And you listen to them, and then you make things happen. And you've done that with Hometown, which is, I can attest to the fact that I've been at Hometown, and I've run into friends of mine from Evanston, friends of mine from Lake Forest, friends of mine from Glenview. I cannot believe how many people his business brings into this community. I know that Guildhall does the same thing, because Guildhall was the first restaurant on the North Shore that I wanted to eat at. And I've lived here 32 years. And there was no restaurant on the North Shore that was, I would go to the city, and I know that everyone else did too. And so you were the village that supported these businesses that came into town. And during COVID, you were the first village on the North Shore that moved forward with something creative, like taking up the spaces outside of their stores and making things happen for them, for outdoor dining, for pickup, for outdoor dining, for ways that they could stay open, and they did stay open, and we're very fortunate, we're all very fortunate to have them still here. So I know that I'm glad I'm not voting, and I'm glad that you're the ones making the decisions, but we have to think of how to keep our restaurants, because like it's been said here, COVID is not gone yet. And we want to make sure that if there is a reoccurrence of anything, that they have the ability to continue to be in business. And we also have to continue to think about their neighbors. And I think that they're trying to be really good neighbors to the other businesses that are surrounding them. And I know you listen to them too, so you are the ones that have to make the decision how you want to move forward. But I appreciate everything you're doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have another business in town.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Taub. I'm the dermatologist at Advanced Dermatology, and we also have Glencoe. I'm 100% in favor of everything that they said. I'm a frequent diner at both locations. Lou has been a wonderful neighbor. But I also think we have to address the elephant in the room that's been there way before COVID, which is that there's a limited amount of parking in Glencoe. I don't care about the appearance of the outdoor, personally, of Guild Hall. I think it's fine, and it's more important to have a thriving business than it is to have like a beautiful row, in my opinion. Also, there's no question that it is super lively in Glencoe, and it has put Glencoe on the map, and I think it's wonderful. I grew up in Glencoe back when Winneconne was actually Winneconne. I still remember what it smelled like, the sawdust on the floor and everything like that. We bought everything there. But I can say that my patients complain bitterly about the lack of parking. And also, some of my patients are old and they don't get around so well. So that's a little bit of a difficulty, especially in the summer when things are really hopping, especially on that corner with Hometown. I would like, and I'm sure Lou would be, amenable to this, but I think we need to be a little bit stricter with keeping the sidewalk open, like by putting, like the things that they have at movie theaters if we go there anymore. Just something to indicate that you should stay out of the main walkway, because some of my elderly or disabled patients really struggle with getting through there. And then, I just think we have a parking problem. So I don't know where you're going to create new parking, but, it would be nice to at least have, I don't know what the answer would be. But that's my biggest concern, is that by doing these external things that we take the parking spaces up. On the other hand, I'd rather forego that and still have the restaurants, because I see that they're important. But, I have a constituency too that I have to answer to, and so I just want to give my report.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, hi. First off, everybody, sorry for being late. I was about 20 minutes late, but I did hear some of the prior voices. My question for you, a couple things. First off, I also read an email from your organization. I don't know if it was from you or someone else, and I thought your story was compelling. But I'm curious if you know roughly what your customers' time duration is. How long do they feel like they need that parking space? It's one of the factors we're working with, is duration of parking.
So typically, I would say that the average, like, assuming we're running on time, which we're getting better at, I would say the typical parking spot would be probably less than an hour. There's occasion, though, where people are there for longer, and sometimes less. So that's pretty much it. Mm-hmm.
I had one question also. So I don't remember, but where are the handicap parking spots in town?
Well, there's one, I think, right like across the street, if I'm not mistaken, at the very end.
There's one
directly across the street from you, near the art gallery on the corner, as well as another just adjacent to the park.
Because the other possibility would be those who can't get around as well, to make more spots available for those people, and then fewer for those who can get around.
Right.
And whether
Well,
that-
we had asked when we first moved in, can't we have a couple spaces? That would be really nice. But, again, we realize that every business probably feels that way. So, we do have, I don't know how many people come and go in a day, but I would estimate it's maybe 10 people an hour around there. And many of them do come from outside of Glencoe. So, 10 people is a lot. Obviously, even having 2 spaces. But it would help. And it would certainly help if we had even 1 space where we could, if we knew somebody was a lot older, we could call them and get ready for them and keep that space.
and for any business in town, really, if there are more throughout town,
Right,
and less for people who can't, like I said, get around as well.
right. The only problem
I
is
mean,
that
there's
then
Temple
those,
Court and
those
then
spaces stay open most of the
I
day
know, that's the
because,
problem.
so it's always an issue, right?
Thank you. And we're taking your comments seriously, and we're going to weigh them as we try to figure out what to do. Sharon, should we invite additional public comment?
Whatever.
Is the,
you'd like to do
is
at
there
this point.
anybody else who?
I know somebody did sign in, Mr. Schneal signed in. I think he's the only one that's signed in that
Okay.
didn't speak yet.
Mr. Schmiel, when you get up there, say your name and address for the record. And
Okay, for the record, J. Schmiel, 757 Greenleaf in Glencoe. And I have to say that I can only comment on what was on the agenda packet. The last half hour I didn't have privy to, so I have to comment as Sharon presented it in the packet and not the additional material. Anyway, as you know, I've expressed many concerns, but I'd like to make some concrete suggestions on the 3 items under consideration. First of all, outdoor dining. Similar to all the rules that the village has on setback distances, sizes of signs and building heights and all that sort of thing, I think there should be strict rules for outdoor dining. For example, tables and chairs should be placed against the restaurant building and not at the curb blocking the sidewalk, and not up and down the street in front of other businesses. And the tables and chairs should be removed from the sidewalks when the business is closed. And other furniture such as heaters, serving stations, and umbrellas should be prohibited. Heaters can be located under awning like Hometown does, tables with dishes and utensils should be inside the restaurant. As a general principle, pedestrians should have first priority for the use of their sidewalks. Regarding carryout parking, too many parking spaces in downtown Glencoe have 2-hour limits. Dedicated parking, carryout parking should be eliminated in favor of short-term spaces that are open to all. And then with regard to the dining structures on the public right-of-way, we haven't heard it yet, but there was no justification in Sharon Tanner's material presented for the level of the proposed fee of 50 cents per square foot per month for parking spaces. This works out to about $3 per parking space per day, and it's wholly inadequate. The city of Evanston charges $2 per hour for parking in their commercial districts. By comparison, the proposed Glencoe fee is too low by a factor of about 10. When proprietors established their restaurants in Glencoe, they knew the limitations of their facilities. Starbucks, for example, has drive-through lanes at many of their stores, but by coming to Glencoe, Starbucks knew that their space would not support such lanes. However, what if they came and asked the village to block off Park Avenue and erect barricades so that they could create a Starbucks drive-through? Is that really much more absurd than putting barricades in the street and taking over multiple parking spaces on Vernon? So in conclusion, pedestrian obstacles like muddy and flooded sidewalks, cars and bicycles that don't respect crosswalks, and the only traffic signal on Sheridan Road from Chicago to Highland Park without a pedestrian signal. These pedestrian obstacles continue to plague Glencoe, and downtown parking structures, parking problems have existed in Glencoe for years. I think the board should be working to eliminate pedestrian obstacles and improve downtown parking rather than considering proposals that make both of these situations worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmiel. Are there any other public comments? We don't have anyone else signed in, but I want to provide an opportunity for that. Okay, apparently not. Sharon, go ahead.
Thank you. So we would ask that the board kind of separate your conversation into two distinct categories. First being dining structures, and then we'll talk a bit about the temporary carryout parking spaces. So where we left off after the February 17th meeting is that there really are a series of questions before the board that will determine our next steps. The first questions are really the threshold questions, which are, would you like to consider in the future dining structures in the street, namely parking spaces? Would you like to consider dining structures on the sidewalks where space allows? And if so, what types of structures? And we can talk about that more in a moment. We did hear from Guildhall about a suggestion for a type of structure that has not yet been used in the downtown. If structures are considered in the future, we are recommending a fee of 50 cents per square foot per month. As we noted at last month's meeting, this is a fee that's intended to encourage judicious use of space while not being overly prohibitive. And we would also recommend a series of appearance and design guidelines. I can walk through them quickly this evening, though I don't want to get in the way of your good discussion. For spaces that use on-street space, we would recommend requirement of a crash barrier with specifications to be determined on a case-by-case basis based on the site and the use. We would recommend that table umbrella material be limited to canvas or similar type materials with no plastic or PVC, no writing or signage on the umbrellas, and colors that are consistent with or complementary to the downtown design guidelines. With regards to signage, we would recommend that signage only be allowed at the board's discretion if existing wall signage of the applicant business or an adjacent business is not visible. For heating elements, we would recommend limiting those to only commercial grade heaters that are either propane or electric fueled, with propane tanks covered by shrouds and cords maintained in sound working condition for electric appliances. For lighting, we would recommend only white light, not colored light bulbs or multicolored light bulbs. And if a raised platform is used, we would recommend that it be optional, so that if an applicant wanted to create a level surface to the curb, much like Guildhall has in place today, that be allowed at their discretion, though subject to inspection and review as needed, and certainly with specifications to be determined on a case-by-case basis based upon the use. So I don't want to belabor any of these points too much and get in the way of your conversation, and so I'll pause so that you have an opportunity to discuss, or I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about what we've shared this evening.
Thank you, Sharon.
Quick question. What about Valor and some of the other places in terms of, if we're going to get to this, some of these structures, and if there's some kind of cohesion between the different entities so that it removes some of the concern about that it looking haphazard in the way it was done 2 years ago. Has there been any discussion on something more cohesive across the entire downtown?
I think that would be a good discussion for the board to have with regards to what types of structures, if any, you wish to allow. That can get into the types of not only the structure itself, is it a semi-permanent structure like Guildhall had described, compared to a tent, maybe like a banquet style tent or a canopy style tent. materials that could be used. Do you want to consider allowing plastic or PVC type material, which is more common with like a banquet style tent or an umbrella, or excuse me, a canopy style tent, compared to something that's an awning type material or a canvas type material? A rigid frame versus a frame that can be constructed and deconstructed more rapidly.
Trustee Hallwick, sorry, Sharon, I don't want to interrupt.
No, please do.
I think one point that would be beneficial as we work through this issue, if the board is interested in contemplating what could go there, I think it also is useful to understand what you would think is inappropriate. If there is a structure or material or something that you would say is not fitting within the character of our downtown, that is helpful. And I think we can come up with design guidelines, as Sharon kind of outlined. It's actually relatively straightforward to do that, aligning them to our current design guidelines in the downtown. But I do think it's helpful to know if there's something you don't want to see, then that can be built into the design guideline standpoint.
So this is not our first discussion of this. We've talked about this in at least one meeting. Before that, we've gotten a lot of comment from the public, which we pay attention to, and which, as Sharon mentioned, was kind of evenly divided and concerned, on the one hand, wanting to do everything we can to help the restaurants that we're grateful are here. And some people think, by the way, that the village the Uptown Business District looks great. But there are other people that think it's horrible, and they can't, they think it was all an accommodation of COVID and we should fix it. There are also questions, and Mr. Schmiel raised this, okay, if we're giving away property, what are we charging for it? And we have to think about that. And, we don't want to be confiscatory. We don't want to make the answer automatically no. We have to think about that. And then we have parking, which there's an argument that people have been wrong about this for 50 years, and that it's not very far to walk to park in Glencoe, and it's closer to go to the train station than it is if you go to one of the shopping centers. But no one in Glencoe has ever bought that. And for, the prior 50 years until now, talking about getting rid of a parking space was like getting rid of Social Security. So we have to weigh all of those things. And when we previously talked about this, we're kind of evenly divided about what to do. And I find this different. There's some decisions you make where you sort of know because of the way your knee jerks, or there's some theory or philosophy. This is not one of those. So I find this a difficult decision. Let me just, some of our members think, look, the business district is thriving as it hasn't done before. We have restaurants. Glencoe used to be a place where restaurants come to die, but not now. And that we should do whatever they want and need. And I get that. That's a serious point of view. Other folks think, no, we made an accommodation for COVID and we need to cut back a little. So there's a theory that we want outdoor dining, but maybe not four-season outdoor dining. And maybe we don't want to give up parking spots. And before we decide what our four-season dining should look like, we're going to have to figure out whether we have it. And as we're deciding whether to have it, we have to decide, okay, we certainly needed it during the pandemic. One trustee said, well, at a minimum, we need to punt the decision about whether to have four-season dining by another year because COVID isn't over. And that's a serious point, as we're wearing masks in here. But it seems to me those are the questions, and and we're kind of divided. And I would say I'm of the camp. I'm not sure I love four-season dining that takes away our parking spots. And if we have it, I think we're going to have to charge for it. But I suspect that my view might be a minority on the board right now. But I was sort of persuaded by the idea that maybe it's too soon to decide that as COVID continues and we continue to wear masks. And maybe we need to sort of punt and allow something like what we have for another winter. Gary.
So my view has evolved over time about this. I am now in the camp that says, oh, gee, we're all in this meeting and some of us are wearing masks, and that, we're reading in the paper that, oh, the next wave of Omicron is, let's see what's happening over in Europe, and that's going to come here. And fortunately, hospitalizations haven't been going up, and God willing, we'll all be fine. But it's just a point that we really don't know what's coming next, and anybody that thinks they do is probably wrong, because they're just guessing. And it'll be what it'll be, and maybe another year, treating it as temporary, and for COVID purposes, we kind of keep things going along, and we don't make people do material new investments on the theory that everything's going to be fine and then it isn't. So that's one point, is I would extend things pretty much as they are, with the possibility of maybe charging something additional, because we have seen some of the economic benefits and they're quite substantial, and hopefully things are going better. The parking, on a longer term basis, frankly, imagine a streetscape that's been redesigned. And I grant you it would take away some parking spaces, but imagine the sidewalks in front of Guildhall looking more like the ones that are in front of the other corner. And consequently, you don't have what I think are ugly but absolutely necessary Jersey barriers, big concrete barriers so that you have safety. But what if you actually did that and invested in a more permanent structure? Again, you'd need business, the owners of the properties, and government to all work together to figure out who's going to pay for it, does it make sense economically, et cetera. But I'm throwing it out as an idea that if people like the idea of outdoor dining and thinking that it's here to stay, will people be willing to commit to that economically to generate something that, with all due respect, I think will look a lot nicer than whatever material you're putting on your very fancy tent? It's still a tent. And I think that was one of the complaints we heard, is that they really don't like tents. Some people really don't care for them. But if you had like a glass and steel structure or something a little more modern, or whatever the materials might be, not necessarily glass, that would look a lot nicer but be more permanent, probably more expensive. You could have the outdoor feel, you could have the sidewalks that are clear and you can walk, and you could have the energy that many people seem to really like, that the restaurants have done an amazing job of helping to create for this community, and I think benefit all of us and all the other businesses. Okay, parking, what do we do? Let's just address, well, a low-tech solution that might not involve a huge capital expenditure on anybody's part, but would add some cost to the mix, might just be, why don't we have valet parking? And I don't just mean for a restaurant. I mean for our downtown businesses generally that want to participate in it. Whether it is your shop or, the toy store or whomever wants to participate. And that we could, again, we're not going to run it, et cetera, but we could help facilitate that, including the use of what's now parking spaces to do it, so it's not blocking traffic. But we've got parking spaces. People just psychologically think about walking over to the train station like it's, you know, Alaska, as opposed to, oh, I got to go to get my latest whatever, and I'm going to Old Orchard, and I'm walking a lot farther. I don't even think about it. And I got the closest possible parking space, and I'm walking farther than anybody would have to walk here. We know that. But we're not going to overcome that, as the president said. We're not going to overcome that emotional element. But some sort of solution we haven't tried implementing yet, and see how people like it. It helps all the way around. And then if people want to spend 3 hours, they spend 3 hours. And if they want to be in and out quickly, well, again, with technology, just like with parking apps, you can say, hey, I'm coming, or hey, I'm going to be leaving in 10 minutes. Can you go get my car now, as opposed to going out in the rain and waiting for your car? It can be there. So I just think there are other things we could do that will help facilitate the businesses and make the community, you know, and that we could do now, or we'll start working on towards doing it now. Again, the business of giving away street spaces with Jersey barrier, if we're going to do it, if the economics work, I'd rather commit to it on a longer term basis and make it really look nice again for everybody's sake. I think that would be helpful for the businesses in terms of the customer appeal and everything else. Anyway, sorry to take so long.
Thank you. Dudley.
The Plan Commission just finished a major study on the downtown. One of the issues that they did look at was this issue of transparency, and that is being able to view our what we call outdoor rooms from the pedestrian realm. And whatever solution we come up with, I'm hoping that we can have as much transparency as possible. That is, being able to see the buildings from the street, from the sidewalk, and be unencumbered. With respect to parking in the street, I know that Evanston and other communities have been able to work it out even with their parking issues. I'm pretty much okay with that. We need to kind of rethink our parking management, finding ways to get people from our empty commuter parking lot into downtown. It's a bit of a challenge, but I think we should look at that and see what we could do there. And we're in the kind of situation where the cost to build a parking space is probably more than the car in the space. And so, okay, so these are quite valuable, and yes, we should charge for it. I know that the staff is looking into some communities as we look at that. So the only other question that I would have is what kind of timeline are we thinking of? Would we think it'd be okay to have, shall we say, no covered structures through the fall, and that would give us some more time to address some of these other issues, or would we want to do a full year and go through the winter again with the same structures as we have? So that's a decision that we need to collectively make. But I am very concerned about having a strong, vibrant downtown, but I also don't want to satisfy the aesthetics of the community for that. So those are my two values, and I don't think they have to be in conflict with each other. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Gail.
So I definitely am in favor of extending the outdoor dining. I think, as we all talked about in terms of the vibrancy of the community, it's so important. It's helpful to the restaurants, and I'm the believer that we don't know where we're going with COVID, and I would hate to give up something that has worked so well when the future is so uncertain at this point in time. So I definitely would like to see a continuation of the program. I think parking issues can be solvable. I think it's a perception. Everybody looks at their Fitbit to see how far they walked, but God forbid they should walk to a parking space. So I think we have to work on getting people to choose parking, their parking spaces appropriately, and also be helpful to some of the businesses that might have issues with people needing handicap spaces. So I definitely think that's something that we need to be reallocating those spaces and figuring out what to do. But I definitely, so the answers to my questions is, should we continue with these programs? Absolutely. I'm in favor of that.
Gail, for in perpetuity, so that we should be thinking about the particular aesthetics, or are you talking about, okay, let's see where we are in a year?
Well, so in terms of the aesthetics, I think most of the aesthetics issues had been relating to just, I think, one of the restaurants, and that's where we'd seen more complaints, and frankly, that tent is down, so we don't have that one now. So I'm curious what Valor even had been planning at this point in time. I mean, frankly, I would like to see a continuation of outdoor dining. I think it's here to stay, throughout the world, as it's been said, and I'd like to see how we can facilitate that. If nothing else, I would like to just see the 1-year continuation as we kind of sort out what some of our considerations need to be and how we're going to solve some of these parking issues. So I guess I would just hate to rush a decision for a long term.
Two trustees left.
Yeah, I'll go next maybe. So I've been a resident of Glencoe for 10 years. I've been on the board for 7. And 7 years ago, I was on the finance committee. We were talking at length about how to make downtown more vibrant, how to bring businesses into downtown. And COVID did it. So it's sort of one of those things where I think this has been amazing. I think downtown is more vibrant than it's ever been. I want to keep it that way. And so I am totally in favor of maintaining outdoor dining and working with the restaurants to keep them, aesthetically pleasing, but keep them there. So.
Okay. First off, I want to point out, Trustee Rubin, thank you for bringing up some notions of sustainability, like so painting a vision that the right-of-way can be used for more than vehicles, right? We can optimize our public rights-of-way for something more and other than vehicles. So the notion of working pedestrians and a pedestrian priority, that I think that's part of what you were expressing. I love that. And Dudley, you're talking about creating these outdoor rooms, this notion of having viewscapes and creating special places and places to gather. I think those are great sustainability perspectives that, quite frankly, by definition, should be part of our future. With respect to this question here around the parking spaces, as I understand, there were 2 establishments that used parking spaces, one of which has stopped using them, right? So there were 10 or 15 parking spaces, I don't know the number.
It was 9 total.
9 total, half of which have come back into circulation. And as I understand it, when those Valor parking spaces came back into circulation, there was no measurable impact on either the parking experience or the business growth, right? So I don't see evidence that parking spaces are altering at this scale of, what'd you say, 9 spaces is altering the business dynamic of downtown in any adverse way. I just don't see any evidence of that. The other thing is the whatever we do around parking to help facilitate parking in general, is we can certainly limit the number of parking spaces that are allocated, right? So if we establish a policy, we can say no more than X number of parking spaces can be utilized in the future for outdoor dining, right? So we can easily do that. In any policy we set, we should make sure it's very flexible so that we can adjust that up or down as market and board feels is appropriate. The pricing, I want to caution us on the pricing, like the point of reference that was provided to us, and I don't know what else the staff has come up with, but of course we have free parking. So communities that charge for parking, of course, are trying to recover that cost, which goes into the factoring in your square footage. Let's just not forget that's a simple thing to make sure we recognize our parking is free. If we were charging everywhere, then and we allocated parking spaces, we'd need to recover that opportunity cost of charging for parking. I am in favor. I don't know if I was clear about that, but I'm in favor of doing and allowing a set number of spaces for outdoor dining. With respect for the sidewalks, I'm a little less aggressive on that. I do find sometimes the seating is disruptive, and several of the folks who wrote in were neighbors of these businesses, have expressed some concerns. I wouldn't mind finding ways to limit that a little bit so it's not quite so sprawling, so that we're not overlapping too far with neighboring businesses. And if we do allow that, we've got to make sure we document that neighboring business is okay with it. It is very important that we keep the sidewalks open and accessible to all people, right? Not just everybody on a bicycle, but people who have assisted mobility in some way. And that to me is very important. Ultimately, if we long-term, President Ronan, you seem to be asking about the long-term viewpoint. Yes, I am with Trustee Rubin. Long-term, we could and should be thinking about how we reshape our public rights of way to serve more than just parking. And that may mean wider sidewalks, fewer parking spaces, more biking, more walking, more drop-offs, more lift rides, more alternative methods of getting to do your errands downtown. I think we really need to spend some time thinking about how long we allow these parking spaces, right? So 2 hours. How many people downtown go downtown for more than 2 hours during the day, right? That's not sort of a dinner. I suspect it's not a lot. I suspect most are like the dermatology appointment, who are an hour-ish. Is an upper limit of their usual use of a parking space. So allowing more flexibility in the parking, I think, would be helpful in general. And also, of course, I don't know what the handicap requirements are, but I would think we could find another additional spot there. So those are my reactions. If we were voting today, I'd be in favor, but I'd be in favor of a flexible policy that we can use to experiment and adjust without going through a massive effort and brain damage. Make some policies that we can adjust and see how they work, right? If it didn't work, we'll dial it back. If we need more, we make more. If the price is way too high and everybody's like, no way, I'm never going to do that, it's going to kill my business, then we lower the price of the parking space and vice versa. I think we need to create a place and opportunities for us to be flexible, allow us to experiment, allow us to make some mistakes, and fix them. That's where I'm at.
Thank you. Clear, concise, helpful. I just want to make one comment because Trustee Bree said something that I don't exactly agree with, and that was that COVID is what helped our businesses. I mean,
I wouldn't say it helped.
Well, no, I think
we tried something new.
The fact that we were flexible and they were flexible and they figured out with our village staff how to weather this disaster, and that was great. I sort of feel like the theater, which I hope will get back, was what started Glencoe's renewal. And clearly outdoor dining is part of it. Clearly four-season outdoor dining with, the way that some of our restaurants have done it has been necessary during COVID. I don't know whether four-season outdoor structures on village property is necessary, and I think that's part of the debate. But I guess I'm persuaded by what Gail said to me, which is, well, it might be necessary. It's too soon to decide it's not necessary. So I'm in favor of punting for another year. I do think we're going to have to figure out at some point what we should be charging. I don't want it to be so much that people can't do it, but you know, it's sort of like a ground lease out there, and we owe it to the, you know, our residents to be charging an appropriate amount.
Isn't the problem with punting though? Don't people at Guildhall need to know that right now they've got these structures that are for winter, and I've not been in it in the summer, but it looks like it'd be hot, right? So they need some guidance sooner than later on if they're going to take these down and put in something else. And same with us. So my problem with punting, like, and keeping it as is, they need to make strategic decisions around their businesses about May through October, probably within the next month. So I think we need to try to help them make these decisions as much as we can, while leaving the flexibility to review this in a year, the concept of 4 seasons, some of the structures. But
So they right now have, you know, structures that they created, and I appreciate that they might want to, you know what they can do in perpetuity now. I'm not comfortable. I mean, I would not ask them to change anything, and they can certainly change their structures along the lines of what they propose under the current regime if they wanted to. And I get that there is some risk that we look at it and not like it and say, you're going to have to stop. For many of these businesses, they're renting, so they have to figure out, this is like, it's like a build out in rental space, and there's a risk. What if you don't renew? But, so I'm not comfortable. I could be in the minority here. I've been counting votes, and this is not something where I'm not going to light myself on fire over this, because there's no obviously right answer, but I'm not in favor at this juncture in permanent 4-season, so it's not outdoor, it's indoor on a structure on the street. I'm not yet persuaded that we should do that 4-season. Maybe we should, but and there may be some trustees that think, yep, we should. I'm not in that camp, but I am comfortable punting for another year, which would allow another year of 4-season dining. And if in the meantime our businesses think we have a better idea for what it's going to look like, they should try that. Maybe because I don't. Okay, I go there. I use them. I think I'm going to sign up for one next week. I use Guildhall's greenhouses. I've been in them in the summer where they take the sides off, and so it's not as hot as you would think, and it was fine. But I don't love the way it looks in town. That's just my, I'm not going to make public decisions based on how I personally feel it looks, but I'm not alone. I mean, we got all these letters, and half the people said this is great, it saved the town, and the other half say it's horrible, you're destroying the town. So, we're weighing that. And I appreciate, by the way, that we need Guildhall. We need Hometown. We need all of them. It's changed the village from what it was when the first 50 years I was here, when the place was dead. Okay, so that's why I'm saying punt. But I'm not saying, I hope punting doesn't mean they have to, I don't want them to have to tear anything down.
Well, if I could interject just a bit, because I do think we need to come out of this discussion to some degree with at least a sense of what is okay or not. Because we're going to get requests. If the board determines that we're not going to stop what we've accommodated for the last couple of years, we're going to accommodate it, let's say, through the winter of 22-23, we are going to get other requests to utilize public right-of-way, the street, for this summer. If there are, and this is to some degree, Trustee Hallwax, what I was referencing before, if there are concerns about appearance, then I think there needs to be some clarity that's generated around appearance. And it may not be a full set of appearance standards, but it may be something along the lines of, we received a lot of complaints about the tent that was in the street last summer. If the board believes that that is something that we want to address so that those complaints don't happen, then we should come back to you with some ways to do that. If you're saying it's okay because COVID may last longer, and if restaurants find it necessary to erect a more, kind of Sharon said, a more banquet style tent to accommodate their seating in the summertime, and we're okay with that, then I would just like to make sure that everyone is comfortable with that before we move forward with it, because those requests are going to come in soon. I mean, we're at spring. This is around the time when those discussions begin, and I think that is helpful. The other component that I think would be useful to get board insight and feedback on is if there's a fee structure that is associated with the use of the street, what does that fee structure look like? And admittedly, we've created one, to Mr. Schmeel's point, that is perhaps not as based in a specific reality as some might like, but this is somewhat uncharted territory as well. There are not a lot of communities that are doing this. There are a lot of communities that are talking about it. I should say none of you are experiencing something that other neighboring communities aren't dealing with. Winnetka just went through this last week. They have a similar situation that they are grappling with. Highland Park is going to be doing the same thing, and a number of others on the North Shore, including Lake Bluff, all of whom did this to some degree through the pandemic and want to figure out how to do it moving forward. So if there is a fee structure that you want to apply to 2022, we need to know that as well, because we'll want to communicate that to the restaurants as a component of this. I think Trustee Mulvaney's point is a really good one. If we say we don't want to see more than X number of parking spaces utilized for this purpose in the downtown, and we can spread that out or adjust it or change it, that may be another component that staff looks at and we come back to you with. But I really do think the 2 points that staff could use guidance on are fees and appearance, because those are going to be the 2 things that we get asked first. And if you have thoughts, strong otherwise, on that, we can come back to you next month with a proposal at the board meeting that you can beat up a little bit more, but then ultimately perhaps vote on, so that we have a guidance document for 2022. And then we work on a lot of those other things that came up in this conversation through 22 and into 23 on a going forward basis.
Let me say something about, thank you, that's helpful. Let me say something about fees. So I'm going to be in favor of more serious lease-like fees when I'm confident that our businesses are not operating in a disaster time when they're, but because I'm not confident of that yet, I mean, there are a lot of people who are still not going to restaurants. Is that about to end? I hope so, but I don't know. So I would not, I'm willing to maintain pretty modest fees until we have some comfort that we're not driving the last nail in the coffin here. But then, after that, once we get back to some normalcy, we owe it to everybody to think about serious fees. And on appearance, I would not want to be personally deciding on any of it, but I think, it'd be fine to have the plan commission do the appearance review that they do. And if we've been not doing that with these structures, then maybe we can start. So that's how I would answer those two questions, but I don't know what other people think.
I'll chime in. I like the idea of having the proposals go through the plan commission for the visual check. That makes sense to me, very logical. We have a system in place. We've got people who have volunteered to do that kind of work, and they've, why not? I do, however, have a personal opinion on that, and I do think that, I don't like the notion of tents. We heard that pretty clearly. I also think jersey barriers are probably not the way to go, but again, I'm also open to letting the commission decide. One thing I find interesting is the concrete walls, becomes a mural in a room for art, and I was going to say it was a few months ago we had the conversation around murals, and then I realized, holy smokes, that was in person, so that was more than 2 years ago.
It was last July, actually. It was the last time we were in person.
Yeah. Was it? Yeah. So, that does become an opportunity, in my opinion, for interesting art, and actually an additional value add to the downtown is to have some appropriate aesthetic around the whatever you call a half concrete wall. What was the other point? I'm sorry, President Ronan. Fees, yeah, fees. I say get started. I mean, pick a number. It's somewhat arbitrary. Try it. I mean, what the hell? 50 cents I see up there. So the only thing I think is important is that we communicate to the businesses that we're starting off, and it's likely going to change as we learn more, and as we understand the demand and supply of this idea. However, we probably ought to put some kind of upper limit, right? We probably should say it's never going to more than double in a year to year or something along those lines. But just so that they have a sense for planning and how much they want to invest. But I would say you got to start somewhere, and if we don't have information, let's do our best and make our best estimate.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on? Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo some of these concepts. There's a concept in urban planning called tactical urbanism, and the idea there is that you try it. And I think we should try these good suggestions. In addition, I think when it comes to fees, I think we should always have a fee for parking. There were some proposals for no fee, maybe for the first space, but I think every space is valuable, and I think that builds the case for having a fee, and probably also, and maybe an upper level. I mean, you can't buy all the spaces downtown for your project, so maybe no more than 4 or something like that, or in front of your unit, however many you're allowed. So that's really all I want to say. I pretty much agree with my colleagues.
In light of the comments, I especially agree with the one of not wanting to suggest that we're going in one direction, and then a business spends money on that, and then we go 20 minutes later in another direction. I find that very inappropriate, which is why, and again, to your point about transparency and what the street looks like, et cetera, and this is strictly personal taste, and consequently, it should be irrelevant to my decision, because I'm not the one that should make design decisions. But if people like the idea of something like a really nice tent, as was described, a more permanent tent, great, as long as we let everybody else do something like that as well. Clearly, the tent that Valor had, just as an example, we did hear a lot of complaints about. That's not what's being suggested tonight. If you wind up having to go back to igloos again, I don't know if you wind up putting those things in storage. You don't get rid of them in case you need to put them back, because it turns out that configuration, if you get hit by COVID hard, doesn't work for your patrons, or whatever the rules might be. So I'm a little concerned about suggesting that people go to an expense and then something is going to change that and they won't be able to amortize that out in an appropriate way for their business. As to charging, I agree. I think just the gut check of, oh, you mean that's $90 a month for a parking space in Glencoe, when we're always hearing so much about the parking spaces in Glencoe. That, again, I don't have a magic number, but it strikes me as low. I would not say to anyone, oh, we'll never raise it by more than X, because we might be starting really too low, at least on a temporary basis, and then figure that out later if this is simply, as the president puts it, becomes a more permanent ground lease situation, a longer term ground lease type situation, as opposed to a very temporary situation. And I think, again, if we're going to allow, when we figure out where to put which kind of parking spaces, whether it's handicap, pickup only during these hours, and the rest of the time it's maybe 15 minutes, etc. We have to consider all of our businesses, not just our restaurants, that might need such an accommodation. I don't want to be unfair. So, again, I think we need to be pretty reasonable about that, and treat everybody similarly. That's it. And I know that doesn't solve anything, but that's the problem. There is no right answer, but whatever staff comes back with, at the end of the day, I would err on the side of being accommodative to the business community and what they've brought to all of us, the benefits they've brought to all of us in Glencoe. I'd err on that side.
We could probably talk about this for another couple hours. We do have a couple of other agenda items. Phil, do you think we've given enough guidance that you can leave the meeting and not merely scratch your head?
Yes, I do want to point out one thing that I do think that came up in the most recent part of the conversation that is potentially a bit complicated, and that is in this kind of interim window as to appearance. The Plan Commission is not going to want to come up with its own design guidelines for this. The Plan Commission is going to want to know that whatever design they approve, you all approve of, because it's within the context of something. So I would say that if we are not prepared at this time to say these are the exact design guidelines, and I'm not saying tonight, but let's say next month at the board meeting, it will be very difficult for the Plan Commission to pluck out of the ether what is going to look pretty versus what isn't. It's subjective. So I would just say that I think if the intent is let's get through a period of time here, and let's say perhaps we have a relatively modest set of design standards, i.e. we don't want to have a tent. That is something that that administratively I think staff can handle in this interim period. Whether the restaurants want to invest in something that may change is a fair question, and I think the staff, are going to have to work with the restaurants to understand what they're comfortable accommodating. As to, so that's one piece. As to fees, we will come back to you with fee structure recommendations for action next month. I will say one point, and I think it's important. The village has altered the makeup and blend of our downtown parking spaces many, many different times over the years. There is no real magic to it. The 15-minute spaces that exist today next to Parkway Drugs and North Shore Community Bank were added at the request of those businesses many, many years ago. There's a 5-minute parking space near a dry cleaner that was added at the request of the dry cleaner. 15-minute spaces have been added and taken away at the request of businesses over the years, and we've handled that fairly administratively. And I would say staff can do that, can continue to do that. And if there is a desire, and I heard it, for there to be a fee that gets associated with a designated curbside space, we will come back to you with that, and then we will work with the business community at the staff level to administer that. If you're comfortable with it, that's something we'll bring back next month. Really, what we wanted to make sure is that if you want to apply a fee to that, we know that, and that we can bring something to you so that you can approve that fee structure, and then we work with the businesses to make sure that it works. But I will say, those 15-minute spaces, there's no magic to them right now. The 2-hour spaces, I think we have had the conversation, and it warrants a broader one probably. We have the ability to adjust that. They don't all need to be 2. They could be 1. They could be 3. There are spaces in the downtown that are underutilized and spaces that are overutilized. And I think we have the ability with the enforcement mechanisms that the Public Safety Department uses to adjust that and to make it relatively straightforward to enforce as well. So I don't want you to feel like there's only 2 options or 3 options with parking. There are many options, and I think we should continue to explore that, as well as some of what Trustee Rubin mentioned in terms of technology and finding ways. I think the village has a role in that, and we can continue to do that. So we will come back to you with some fee recommendations and perhaps some watered down appearance recommendations while we work through perhaps a broader set of standards that would apply on a going forward basis if the board's preference is to use another year of time to get to a better outcome. And I get the sense that's where everybody is, and I'm seeing nodding heads, and I want to make sure we're good.
That's where I feel a little guilty because we're punting, but I just think we should.
I have a little concern about the timing. So if we're going to go next month, meeting is what?
April 21st. 5 weeks.
It seems like we need to arrive at a decision here, probably for the restaurants.
I think we need to arrive at a decision next month. I think we may have draft licensing agreements on next month's agenda for you to consider. Whether you approve them or you don't would be a question, but we at the staff level can start working toward that and place a draft licensing agreement, for instance, with Guildhall to get us through a longer period of time, and then we can adjust that at the meeting based off of where we go. We admittedly don't have a lot of time. You're
All
right.
Fine.
We're right up against it.
So I sort of feel like the decision we're making now is we're okay. The big decision, 4-season, using our, 4-season dining and potentially using street, and we're saying okay for another year.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that even though I'm not sure in the way longer term that I'm okay with that. It could be that there's a majority on the board that is, and we'll know more after another year. This is, in my view, and I think the board is saying, this is not the time to get tough about anything, because these folks are still operating in a difficult environment.
Would it be logical to also include in the recommendation a maximum number of spaces to allocate to this? It seems to me in reality we really only have probably 3 applicants in reality, which is probably no more than 15 spaces at the really far end. Is it logical at this point to just say, hey, whatever we do for this interim punting decision, it will not be more than X number of spaces? I think that may alleviate some people's concerns. I mean, I get the sense there are folks who are worried we're going to have, 80% of our parking spaces converted or something. It's like in reality we're talking about a handful of applicants, and I just wonder if that would be helpful.
I think we can do so from a dining standpoint. I think the question as to the overall number on, let's say, curbside pickup spaces, that's something that I think we need to work with the businesses on to understand what they need. It was mentioned before, Hometown at one time had 4. They've narrowed that back down to 3. There may be others that have more than they need right now, and I think we will connect with everybody and come back to you overall with what we anticipate. With potentially, as you said, Trustee Mulvaney, before, the ability to adjust if necessary, given conditions. But yeah, we can come back with something.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, well, Sharon, thank you.
Thank you.
To the restaurants and the other business, and to the citizens who came to talk about this. We appreciate it. We benefit from your advice, and we're grateful that you're here, and you should always feel that you can come to the village to make sure you're getting a fair shake. So, thank you. All right, the next item, and we don't have as much time as we wanted. The next item, item 4, is a continued discussion of potential sign code updates. And I'll ask Taylor Baxter, who's our Development Services Manager, to present on this. Thank you, Taylor, and I'm sorry we didn't give you as much time as you wanted.
Okay, thank you, President Rowan, members of the board. This is a follow-up to a previous discussion that we had last fall. The October 20 last year committee of the whole meeting, we introduced some issues that we have with our current sign code. Those issues are first and foremost some clarity and usability issues. Right now, it's quite difficult to administer this code at times. It reads kind of like a giant block of text. Regulations are haphazardly placed throughout the code. We could really use some cleaning up. For simplicity, not just for staff, but for businesses, people applying for signs, contractors. It can be really difficult at times to understand what's going on in there. There are some rather significant legal issues with our code, which we will get into later on in this presentation. There have been some recent Supreme Court decisions in the last decade or so that have caused some parts of our code to be problematic legally. And it's something that we really need to address in one way or another. Finally, there's some relatively minor policy concerns. We're going to talk about one of those tonight. In October, the board instructed staff, we presented a few different paths forward about how we should approach this code update, whether we should do a real planning process right now, do some significant outreach to businesses. The board instructed staff to try and approach this in a relatively straightforward manner. To try and address the clarity issues, reduce or eliminate these legal issues, but at the same time to really try and avoid any significant policy changes. So we didn't want to hire a consultant necessarily, go into a planning process and really revisit the policies of the code. And that's what we're attempting to do here. We're really trying to minimize the policy changes. We're trying to keep the language as much as we can. We want really the outcome at this point, because we have not done a full planning process, to really be as close to what we have right now as possible. With one change that I'm going to get into in a little bit more detail, one policy change that we do want to explore. Next slide, please. So the one change that I do want to talk about, window signage. This would be a policy change. At this point, it's for discussion. We're interested in getting the board's feedback. Right now, in the code, in the business districts, window signage allowance is one sign, not larger than 0.2 square feet per foot of linear frontage. So for a 25-foot wide storefront, you get one sign that works out to about 5 square feet, a little over 5 square feet. It's not much at all. There's a line in there that if you don't have a wall sign, if you don't have a wall sign, then your letters in the sign cannot exceed 6 inches in height. It's very restrictive. You get an additional 2 square foot door sign, which in our code right now has strict content limits. We're going to get into the problems with content limits in a moment. They're not really advisable under current Supreme Court rulings. The size limit does double for businesses without a wall sign, but they're still only allowed to have one sign. Next slide, please. Problems with this, downtown businesses tend to want to be able to change out their window signage. Window signage includes things that say masks required, writers theater poster, help wanted, things like that are all window signage. Downtown businesses want to be able to change those out on a relatively regular basis without coming into conflict with our sign code. Right now, they're allowed one sign per code if we're going to read it strictly. Also, the sign allowance is not reflected in current practice. We did a walking audit of downtown. There are many signs and many businesses downtown that exceed this limit that have been there for many years. If we wanted to bring downtown into strict compliance with the sign code, there would be code enforcement action on many businesses downtown. Also, it can be difficult to administer and enforce because it requires getting out tape measures to measure both street frontage and sign area. There could be much more straightforward and easier to administer paths forward. So these are the problems that we have. We have some potential solutions which we want some feedback on. Here's some downtown signage right now. Next slide should show. So the red lines there are signs that wouldn't be allowed under our code. You're allowed one sign. These things are all signs, so they are not allowed currently. These signs, some of them have been here for many, many years. Next slide, please. Here's some more. Letters are too big, exactly. That's exactly right. So that the Lux Lab that actually does not meet content requirements in the current code, which is something we're going to address in a minute. So that's not allowed. Next slide, please, and one more. Some more that would have to be removed. Right now, as you can see, they're not really reflected in what appears to be longstanding practice. So staff wants to explore the possibility of bringing our codes more in line with what we're used to seeing downtown. And there are some ways that we could do that. So policy change, the proposed changes, these are for discussion purposes only at this point. We'd like feedback on them. We'd like to simplify the requirements. Instead of limiting it to one sign, we'd like to talk about having a specific percentage of window area that can be covered with signage. 20% is a starting point. There is no specific guidance on this topic in our design guidelines downtown. I would say there's a spirit to those design guidelines. That spirit is one of simplicity, clarity, brevity in our signage. So that might guide this discussion of how much window signage we want to allow downtown, but we don't have specific mention of window signage in that guidance. A 20% is a starting point, but it could be less. You could determine it could be 10%, 15% would be an appropriate amount of window area that could be covered with signage. So a business owner could change out that signage as needed. We'd like to eliminate the requirement of one sign to allow things like masks required, et cetera, without changing our definition of sign, which would open up a whole other host of problems. Finally, we might want to consider allowing more signage as we do now for more window signage for businesses that don't have a wall sign. These are all things that would be open for discussion. We'd like your feedback on this evening. That's really the only major, or I wouldn't even call it major, significant policy change that is open for discussion in this sign code revision that we're looking for feedback on. We've really tried to limit it to really minimize the number of policy changes at this point. Others, yes.
One question, Taylor. The 20%. Can we look to any other municipalities and what they do?
Absolutely.
And is 20% kind of what they do?
I have seen 20% in other places that I've worked have done 15, 20% with a similar guideline. If you'd like, we can look at our neighbors, North Shore neighbors, and see.
Look, we've obviously survived with these Scott laws. In fact, we didn't notice there was maybe civil disobedience, so I don't want to be pejorative. But it'd be interesting to know what our other North Shore communities do, so we don't want to be an outlier on this.
Absolutely, we can bring those details back to you.
We didn't think it was wrong when we have foodstuffs saying foodstuffs, so we don't want that to be illegal.
We have not gotten any complaints about it.
I was going to say, I think the more important metric on this is that we frankly haven't received complaints. I think what we want to make sure is as we go forward and as signage requests come in, that there's a consistency across the downtown, that the signage requests meet the standards that other businesses are being held to, and frankly, that it doesn't detract from the look of the downtown. You know, that we don't have a specific reference to it in the design guidelines is an important point that we may want to adjust, but I think this is something that we, again, want to make sure we build a consistency into.
Yeah, Mr. President, if I can add, I served on a task force with the American Planning Association on this matter, and 15 to 20% is quite common. You'll find it in Glenview, you'll find it up in Highland Park. It's quite common. But also, our legal counsel for the American Planning Association also suggested not to get involved with content issues. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right. I get that part. Okay.
I am fully in favor of fewer rules. Let the businesses decide, as long as it looks professional, what's right for them. Because if it works, it's going to drive business, and if it doesn't work, they're going to change it, or they won't be around very long. So again, as long as it's professional, et cetera, those types of things. And again, yes, we need to stay away from content that's obviously become quite dangerous. Thank you.
And I would, if I could, add that our plan with this would require a public hearing with the zoning commission. Once you refer it to the zoning commission, our plan would be to reach out to downtown business owners at that point for feedback before it goes to the zoning commission. Notify them obviously of that public hearing so that they can participate and give their opinions on is 15% enough, is 20% too much, et cetera, et cetera.
Stu, you're our lawyer here on this. Are there any content type restrictions that are legal?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if there are some that are legal, and would be consistent with sort of the feel of Glencoe, we might consider that. So what could, you know, what are we talking about here?
Well, you asked me a specific question. I had a full stem winder on Reed v. Gilbert that I was ready to break into, but one of the things that is difficult about what the Supreme Court did in the Reed v. Gilbert case is that it did overturn really decades of what we thought were okay differentiations between signs. And it was a case where bad facts made bad law. But when we talk about content-based discrimination, we think that, okay, so, you know, you can't allow a sign to, a sign for a church can only be so big, but then you allow a sign for a business to be larger. Well, okay, well, that's content discrimination. The problem is when you look at our sign code, there are a lot of things that depend on what the sign says. Real estate signs. A real estate sign is different than a construction sign. How do you know? Because you read it and you realize that one is for the sale of a property and one is for the sale of a construction company that's operating on the property. The difference between on-premises and off-premises signs, that's content-based. If Foodstuffs wanted to put on their awning an ad for Rivers Casino, which is not operating in the Foodstuffs area, that's also content-based. And the courts have been struggling ever since 2015 on where to draw the line. Basically, what is okay and what isn't, and what is an absurd result and what isn't. I can say with confidence that 95% of all sign codes in America do not comply with content-based, are not completely free of content-based discrimination. So we do have some guidelines, though, to answer. That was a big preamble to answer your question. Right now, courts are still comfortable with the difference between on-premises and off-premises advertising or signage. There also, in general, there is a difference between non-commercial and commercial messages, especially in residential areas. So you can, having advertisements for a business in a residential area still seems to be, prohibiting that still seems to be okay. But in general, especially like in a business district, we say that look at the outward dimensions of the sign. Look at the materials, the size, whether it's illuminated, and the actual function of the sign that comes from its communicative content should not be a factor in how you classify and regulate the sign.
You're accepting the difference between on-premises and off-premises?
Yes, that's still there, and that was actually, in Justice Alito put that in one of his concurrences, and so far, that's standing up. There is a case that's actually going before the Supreme Court. I think it's Reagan National Advertising versus City of Austin, which may potentially strike that down, which would completely, it would completely overturn billboard law, basically, in America. So we're hoping that that doesn't do that. When you start talking about having to read the sign to determine how to regulate it, it becomes a slippery slope. And so Taylor and I, and then we have another associate, Braden, who's done a very deep dive into all the cases that have come after Reed, spent some time thinking about what would be a reasonable way to regulate signs and group some of these content-based signs into a category that would give both business owners and residents some freedom without classifying the signs strictly by their content, but also not make it open season for people to put up basically billboards in their front yards. So, Taylor, if you want to kind of talk about some of the ideas.
Absolutely. That was a great segue into this next section, which is the legal issues, which was really one of the overarching reasons for this project. Again, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, the rule of thumb, you shouldn't have to read a sign to determine whether or not it's allowed. That's really the core of it. Our code right now is full of regulations where you have to read the sign to determine whether or not it's allowed. 3 of them are on the screen right now. These are absolutely full of content-based requirements, and there are many more in the code. Some sign types or sign definitions that we have now have kind of half and half. There are some content-based elements of them, which we are going to propose to eliminate those elements and keep what we can, again, with the goal of keeping the status quo as much as possible at this point. Next slide, please. Many of these changes will not have any impact on on number, size, location, etc. of allowable signage. They'll have an impact on what the sign would say. So the outcome of the signs you see around town, the number, etc., wouldn't change. However, a few that we want to talk about tonight are kind of tricky. They might exist in a bit of a gray area. These are real estate, political, private sale, civic event, and construction signs. These are all currently content-based in their definitions. They at least have some strong content-based elements to their definitions and their regulations. Also, these are also signs that you will commonly see in residential areas, which makes them a bit unique and a bit tricky to deal with, which is why we want a bit more guidance on them right now. We do need to eliminate those clear ties to content, anything that's really obvious, talking about you need to read the sign to determine whether or not it's needed. There are a few different paths forward. Again, some of the law here is a bit unsettled. It could change. We're not necessarily saying we need to, we're recommending moving our sign code into, that our primary goal should be complete in compliance with the current reading of Reed, I'd say. Number one would be going the furthest, I guess. Full elimination of ties to content. This would be the introduction of a new sign type, standard informational sign. All lots, including residential lots, would have a standard informational sign, size and number allowance, without regard to time, events, or any content. This would just be, for example, you get 6 square feet of signage, temporary signage, on your property at any time. That's it. We have nothing else to say about it. No content, no time, nothing else. That would be going the furthest towards compliance with Reed. The second option, the second potential path would be to retain these sign types, real estate, political, private sale, etc. Retain those definitions in the code while removing clear and obvious content-based restrictions. So that'd be a smaller step. The third might be the middle path here, which would be to subsume all of these sign types under this standard informational signage type, eliminating content restrictions while allowing increases in the amount of signage you can have at certain times. For example, when your house is for sale, or if there's construction on the property, you might get an additional 6 square feet of signage. That's the middle path. I'll let the village attorney maybe comment on potential legal implications of those 3 paths because it's not entirely clear. The water is a bit murky, as I understand it. We go as far as we can. We could take smaller steps, or we could aim for a middle path.
So one of the issues that you often run to when you're dealing with the Constitution and specifically with regard to the First Amendment is that sometimes you go so far that you end up you end up bumping into another amendment. One of the issues of, if you just said that we are completely content blind and we have 6 square feet of signage and we don't care what you put on it, there are certain cases that also say that for political signs that you have a right to support as many candidates as you want, as vociferously as you want, and especially if you have different members in your family who have different political proclivities, that they should all be able to support every one of their candidates. And unless they were really tiny signs, you would definitely go past 6 feet very quickly. The number 2 is what one of your neighboring communities did, which is make a distinction between commercial signs in residential areas, things like real estate and contractor signs, and then they created a non-commercial informational or message sign. I'm forgetting what it is. I shouldn't forget because I wrote it. But basically, it can be anything from I support this candidate to happy birthday to Nutrier class of 2020, what year are we in, to hate has no home here, to whatever. But it was just a non-commercial message sign, and the only distinction would be that it couldn't be a commercial message. Number 3, which I credit Taylor as actually coming up with a very clever idea, which is that you have a specific amount of square footage, but there are times when you could have more. During a political season, and we don't care what you put on those signs. When your home is for sale, we don't care what you put on those signs. That is one of those that probably would make a judge go, huh, and have to think about it for a while and may even allow it. But often when you do something that is kind of complex, it also makes it hard to enforce. And so that, when you're timing, like, okay, are we in an election season? Are we in a primary season or not? Has this house been listed on MLS? And so you always have to balance trying to make something that is enforceable, that is understandable for the residents, and that's also just practical to follow. I don't know if any of that helped.
No.
Yes, that solved it.
A quick question, are we allowed to pass an ordinance or a law that is not consistent with federal law? I mean, like, fundamentally, can we knowingly go in and make a law that's not compliant?
We would advise you to stop, and I think the answer is that there are probably a lot of things and there's a lot of laws on books that are not compliant with current Supreme Court precedent, that are just sitting out there. In the end, we would not advise risking that, because there are a lot of eyes on this, and this is a very hot topic right now. And the one kind of point that I would make is that, as we all know from discussions about expression with chalking and other things, the past few years have been a very rife time to talk about expression and what kind of messages people have the right to make on their property or on public property.
So as I understood it, only option 1 was compliant.
There, could you go back? Yeah, number 3, and number 2 right now, you could. Oh. There we go.
Let me just say, hey, we could. There are a lot of laws around the country that, to give an example, prohibit abortion, period. And those were all passed when the U.S. Supreme Court precedent for 50 years said otherwise. And so the short answer is, of course, you could do it. We would never deliberately pass something that we felt was unconstitutional, because we always said in the law is it's got to be consistent with the law or consistent with a reasonable argument the law could be and that you could argue to a court. So whatever we decide, we're going to do it with the assumption that a court is going to buy it. And,
And-
you know, whether they end up buying it, I hope we don't have to test it, but that's always what we do.
If I could add, all three of these, we could make the argument that all three of these are legally compliant. There's enough gray area in the law at this point that they could all, you could make the argument.
Good,
Maybe one is the furthest towards, you know, the absolute position.
It was my mistake, and I shouldn't have asked with all these lawyers around. I just wanted to know. My understanding was number one was compliant, the other two were not, and that was my mistake. I misunderstood that.
One would be bulletproof, and it would be also very hard to administer, and the other ones would require some interpretation.
Ultimately, we're going to make a decision that we think is consistent with law, consistent with our job on behalf of our residents and making this a town they would be happy to live in without some god-awful sign next door.
I think we also talked about what constitutes a sign, and I don't know if this is part of it, but I think that would be something worth discussing.
Absolutely. We will look at that at that definition in its entirety as part of this revision.
Thank you for the excellent presentation, Stu. Thank you for the legal advice, and thank you for everybody for the comments. I'm afraid that our committee of the whole meeting is turning into a pumpkin here, because our next meeting should have already started.
I think if we could just summarize next steps so that we can kind of just bring this one to a quick close, and then I think we can certainly adjourn.
I've been trying to sort of follow the discussion. I think we should do our best to be consistent with law. We should simplify with, instead of all this minutia, the 20, which isn't being followed, with something like a percentage, which you're going to come back with, okay, what advice is there from other comparable places and from planning groups or what have you, and if that number is 20%, great, and if we get it wrong, we'll fix it. Is there any other subject on this that we should, you're clearly on the right track, and I would just say, I do not, on the legal part, I don't think you should assume we're just going to throw up our hands and say, okay, we give up. We would like to do what we can to continue Glencoe to keep being the best place in the universe.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. I apologize for folks who came to our village board meeting because we're already late. But is there, and I apologize to Dave Mao, who was going to talk about lakeshore recycling, and I think we're going to push that off to the next meeting.
Yeah.
Is there any other business that any member of the board would like to discuss in the committee of the whole? All right, not hearing anything, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Have a roll call.
Steve, do we need a roll call? It could just a voice vote.
Okay.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. So we have another meeting that's supposed to